Have you ever wondered why some people can stick to their goals while you can't seem to make it past 3 days? You buy the books, watch the videos, feel motivated, promise yourself this time will be different. But then, life happens. You miss one day, then another. And just like that, you're back where you started, scrolling through your phone at midnight, feeling like a failure. Here's what nobody tells you. You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're just using the wrong approach. What if I told you there's a Japanese philosophy that's helped millions of people transform their lives without willpower, without motivation, without any of that self-help nonsense that never seems to work? A system so simple it sounds ridiculous, so subtle you'll doubt it could work, yet so powerful that once you understand it, you'll never see change the same way again. If you're tired of starting over, if you want to finally become the person you keep promising yourself you'll be, then stay with me, because this story is about to change everything you thought you knew about consistency. And if this resonates with you, subscribe to this channel. Drop a comment below telling me the one habit you've been trying to build. Let's do this together. Chapter 1. The Day Everything Changed. The clock read 4:37 in the morning when David opened his eyes. Not because he wanted to. Not because his alarm had gone off. But because his heart was racing again. That familiar tightness in his chest that had become his unwanted morning companion. He lay there in the darkness of his bedroom, listening to his wife Sarah breathing softly beside him, and felt the weight of another failed promise crushing down on him. Yesterday was supposed to be different. He had sworn to himself, really sworn this time, that he would wake up at 5, go for a run, start eating healthy, finish that project he'd been putting off for months. He had lasted until noon. By lunch, he had already eaten the leftover pizza in the fridge. By 3, he had convinced himself that tomorrow would be a better day to start. By evening, he was back on the couch, mindlessly scrolling, hating himself, but unable to stop. David was 34 years old. On paper, his life looked fine. He had a decent job as a software developer, a loving wife, a small apartment in the city. But inside, he was drowning. He had gained 40 pounds in the last 3 years. His energy levels were non-existent. The creative projects he used to love sat abandoned in folders on his computer. His marriage, though Sarah never said anything, felt strained under the weight of his broken promises. Tomorrow, I'll change. He had told her so many times that the words had lost all meaning. He remembered the man he used to be. 5 years ago, he had run marathons. He had built apps that people used. He had dreams that felt possible. Now, he couldn't even keep a promise to himself for 24 hours. The shame was suffocating. David got out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah, and walked to the bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror. Under the harsh, fluorescent light, his face was puffy, dark circles under his eyes. When had he become this person? When did the gap between who he was and who he wanted to be grow so impossibly wide? He had tried everything. He had read all the books. Atomic Habits, The Power of Discipline, Can't Hurt Me. He had bought a gym membership in January that he stopped using by February. He had downloaded meditation apps, meal prep guides, productivity planners. He had made elaborate 30-day plans with detailed schedules and tracking sheets. None of it worked. Or rather, it worked for a few days, maybe a week if he was lucky, and then life would happen. Stress at work, a bad night's sleep, one moment of weakness, and everything would crumble. The worst part wasn't the failure. It was the cycle. The endless loop of motivation and disappointment. Wake up inspired, convinced this time would be different. Feel good for a few days. Hit an obstacle. Give up. Spiral into self-hatred. Wait until the pain became unbearable. Get motivated again. Repeat. David had started to believe something was fundamentally wrong with him, that he simply lacked whatever it was that made other people capable of change. Willpower, discipline, character. Whatever you wanted to call it, he didn't have it. That morning, sitting on the edge of the bathtub with his head in his hands, David made a decision. Not another promise to change. He was done with promises. This was different. This was acceptance. He accepted that he would probably always be this person, that the gap between his current self and his ideal self would never close, that he needed to stop torturing himself with impossible expectations. It was the most depressing moment of his life. It was also, though he didn't know it yet, the moment everything was about to shift. Chapter 2. The Mentor. 3 weeks later, David sat in Dr. Tanaka's office, staring at a small bonsai tree on the windowsill. He hadn't wanted to come. Sarah had suggested it gently one evening after finding him awake at 2 in the morning, eating cereal in the dark. "Maybe you could talk to someone," she had said. Not accusatory. Just sad. That sadness had cut deeper than any argument. Dr. James Tanaka was not what David expected. He had imagined either a stern therapist who would psychoanalyze his childhood or a motivational coach who would yell about discipline and toughness. Dr. Tanaka was neither. He was a 72-year-old Japanese-American man, with kind eyes and an unhurried manner that made the small office feel like a sanctuary rather than a clinical space. For the first 20 minutes, David talked. He explained the cycle of failure, the broken promises, the shame, the sense that something fundamental was broken inside him. Dr. Tanaka listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding, his attention complete. When David finally stopped, exhausted from the confession, Dr. Tanaka was quiet for a long moment. "May I ask you something?" he finally said, his voice soft. "When you decide to change, what does your plan usually look like?" David shrugged. "I try to do everything right. Wake up early. Exercise. Eat healthy. Work on my projects. Be more present with Sarah. I make a schedule. I commit to it. Everything at once. Yes. Why do it halfway?" Dr. Tanaka smiled, but there was no judgment in it. "Tell me, David, have you ever tried to turn an ocean liner?" The question caught David off guard. "What? No, I haven't." "If you wanted to change the direction of an ocean liner, would you spin the wheel as hard and as fast as you could?" "I guess so." "You would capsize the ship, Dr. Tanaka said gently. "An ocean liner weighs 100,000 tons. To change its course, you turn the wheel 1 degree at a time, so slowly you can barely perceive the change. But 5 miles later, you're heading somewhere completely different." David frowned. "I don't understand what that has to do with me." "You are the ocean liner, Dr. Tanaka said, and every time you try to change everything at once, you're spinning the wheel so violently, you capsize yourself. Then you sink. Then you have to rebuild the entire ship and try again." The words settled into the room. David felt something shift in his chest, but he pushed back. "So, what are you saying? That I should just accept being this way? Make tiny changes that won't matter?" "I'm saying that the system you're using is designed to fail, and I'm offering you a different system. One that's worked for thousands of years in Japan. We call it Kaizen." "Kaizen," David repeated. The word felt foreign in his mouth. "It means continuous improvement through small changes. It was developed in Japanese manufacturing after World War II. But the philosophy is much older. It's built on a simple truth. Human beings are terrible at dramatic change. We're wired to resist it. Our brains interpret sudden transformation as a threat. But we're exceptional at tiny, almost invisible adjustments." David felt skepticism rising. This sounded like another self-help gimmick. "So, you're telling me to make small changes? I've heard that before." "Have you?" Dr. Tanaka leaned forward slightly. "Because what I'm about to ask you to do will seem so small, you'll think I'm wasting your time. Try me. For the next week, I want you to put on your running shoes every morning. That's it. Put them on. Sit on your couch if you want. Watch television in your running shoes. After 60 seconds, you can take them off. Nothing else. No running, no exercise. Just the shoes." David stared at him. "That's it? That's the system? That's where we start." That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. David couldn't help the frustration in his voice. How is that going to help me lose weight or fix my life? Doctor, Tanaka's expression didn't change. It won't. Not directly. But it might help you understand something you've been missing your entire life. Will you try it for 1 week? I promise you, there's more to this than you think. David wanted to argue. Wanted to say this was a waste of time, but something in Dr. Tanaka's steady gaze, something in the quiet confidence behind the request, made him pause. Fine, he said finally. 1 week. But when this doesn't work, I'm done with all this. Dr. Tanaka smiled. Fair enough. I'll see you next week, David. Chapter 3. The Hidden Philosophy. David put on his running shoes the next morning with a sense of absurdity so strong he almost laughed. This was stupid. This was pointless. This was definitely not going to change anything. He sat on his couch, shoes on, staring at the wall. 60 seconds. He checked his phone. 50 seconds left. He felt ridiculous. What was this accomplishing? When the minute was up, he took the shoes off and went about his day. That evening, he told Sarah about the exercise with a mixture of amusement and irritation. The doctor told me to put on running shoes and sit on the couch, he said. That's the big solution. Sarah, to his surprise, didn't laugh. Did you do it? Yeah, for 60 seconds. Big accomplishment. It is, though, she said quietly. You kept a promise to yourself. The words stopped him. He had been so focused on how small the action was that he hadn't realized what Sarah saw immediately. For the first time in months, he had set an intention and followed through. The second morning was easier. The third morning, he noticed something strange. He sat there in his running shoes and thought about how close he was to the door. How easy it would be to just step outside for 30 seconds. He didn't do it, but the thought was there. By the fifth morning, something even stranger happened. He put on the shoes and felt the smallest urge to move. Not to run, just to stand up. So he did. He stood in his living room in his running shoes for 60 seconds, then sat back down. When he returned to Dr. Tanaka's office the following week, he was confused. I did what you asked, he said, but I don't understand the point. Tell me exactly what happened each day. David recounted the week. The initial resistance, the growing comfort, the spontaneous urge to stand. Dr. Tanaka nodded, as if David had just described something profound. Do you know why Kaizen works when everything else fails? No, because it's not about the action. It's about identity. Every time you put on those shoes, even just to sit on your couch, you sent a signal to your brain. A signal that said, I am the kind of person who prepares to run. Not I am going to run. Not I should run. But I am this kind of person. Dr. Tanaka stood and walked to the bonsai tree. This tree is 60 years old. My teacher gave it to me when I was your age. Do you know how you grow a bonsai? You trim it? Yes, but not the way you think. You don't make dramatic cuts. You don't force the shape. You make tiny adjustments, almost imperceptible, and you make them consistently over years. You trim one small branch. You adjust the wire by a millimeter. You water it the same amount each day. Each action is meaningless on its own, but the accumulation of thousands of tiny actions creates something extraordinary. He turned back to David. Your brain is like this tree. For years, you've been trying to reshape it with dramatic cuts. Wake up at 5. Run 5 miles. Change everything. Your brain resists because that's traumatic change. But when you put on running shoes and sit on your couch, your brain doesn't resist. It's too small to trigger fear. And in that space of no resistance, something remarkable happens. You begin to change from the inside. David felt something clicking into place, but he wasn't ready to believe it yet. So, what now? I just keep putting on shoes forever? No. Now we add one more degree of turn. This week, I want you to put on your shoes and step outside your front door. Close the door behind you. Stand there for 60 seconds. Then, go back inside. That's all. You're serious. Completely. Chapter 4. The First Fall. For 2 weeks, the system worked. David put on his shoes, stepped outside, stood there. Then, naturally, without forcing it, he started walking. Just to the end of the block at first. Then, around the block. Then 2 blocks. He wasn't losing weight yet. He wasn't transformed. But something fundamental was shifting. He was keeping promises to himself. Small promises, but they were holding, until they didn't. It was a Thursday. David had a brutal day at work. A project he'd been leading for months fell apart because of a colleague's mistake. But David got blamed in the meeting. He came home exhausted, angry, defeated. Sarah tried to talk to him, but he snapped at her. Then, immediately felt guilty. He ordered takeout, ate too much, scrolled on his phone until midnight. When he finally went to bed, he set his alarm, but knew he wouldn't get up. He didn't. When he woke up at 8:30, the morning routine missed, the promise broken, David felt the familiar wave of self-hatred crash over him. There it was. He knew it. He knew he couldn't sustain it. He was back to being the failure he'd always been. He didn't put on his shoes that day. Or the next. By the 3rd day, he had convinced himself the whole thing had been a waste of time. Dr. Tanaka had been wrong. There was no magic system. He was just broken. When he went to his next appointment, he felt defensive before he even sat down. "I stopped," he said immediately. "The system doesn't work." Dr. Tanaka looked at him calmly. "What happened?" David explained the bad day at work, the spiral, the missed mornings. As he talked, he could hear the excuses in his own voice and hated himself more. When he finished, Dr. Tanaka was quiet for a moment. Then, he said something David wasn't expecting. "Good." "Good? I failed." "No, you fell. There's a difference." Dr. Tanaka leaned back in his chair. "In Japan, we have a proverb, Nana korobiya oki. Fall down 7 times, stand up 8. But the wisdom isn't in standing up. Everyone knows you should stand up. The wisdom is in understanding that falling is part of the process. It doesn't feel like part of the process. It feels like proof that I can't do this. Of course it does. Because you've spent your entire life believing that successful people don't fall. But that's not true. Successful people fall constantly. The difference is, they don't let the fall become their identity." Dr. Tanaka pulled out a piece of paper and drew a line that moved steadily upward, then suddenly dropped, then continued upward again, dropped again, continued upward. The overall trajectory was up, but it was messy, full of dips and valleys. This is what real growth looks like. Not a straight line, not perfection, just a general trend upward with constant setbacks. The people who transform their lives aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who've learned to fall without quitting. David stared at the drawing. "So what do I do now?" "You practice one of the most important concepts in Kaizen, Shoshin. You simply return to the practice as if you're starting fresh. Tomorrow morning, you put on your shoes again. That's it. You don't have to make up for the missed days. You don't have to punish yourself. You just do the next right thing." It can't be that simple. It is. Simple doesn't mean easy. But it is simple. Dr. Tanaka paused. "David, I want you to understand something. The reason you keep quitting isn't because you lack discipline. It's because you think falling means failure. Once you believe you've failed, your brain says, why bother continuing? But if you understand that falling is neutral, just information, just part of the path, then you can stand up and continue without all the shame and drama." David sat with those words. Could it really be that simple? Could he really just start again without the weight of failure crushing him? "What if I fall again?" he asked quietly. "Then you'll stand up again. And again. And again. Until standing up becomes more automatic than staying down." Chapter 5. Identity Shift. The next morning, David put on his shoes. It felt different this time. Not motivated. Not excited. Just clear. This was what he did now. He was someone who put on running shoes in the morning. The falling hadn't changed that. He stepped outside and stood on his front step. 60 seconds. Then he went back inside. 2 days later, he walked around the block. 4 days later, he jogged for 2 minutes. Not because he had to. Because it felt natural. Something was happening that David couldn't quite name. The action was still small. Still almost insignificant. But the person doing the action was changing. He noticed it first in small ways. He made his bed one morning without thinking about it. He drank water instead of soda at lunch, not because he was on a diet but because he wanted to. He sent Sarah a text in the middle of the day telling her he loved her, something he hadn't done in months. These weren't connected to the running. Or were they? He couldn't tell anymore. It was like Dr. Tanaka had said about the ocean liner. The wheel had turned 1 degree. He couldn't see the change in the moment. But his direction was shifting. In his next session, Dr. Tanaka introduced a new concept. Ikigai, he said. It's the Japanese idea of your reason for being. The thing that makes you want to get up in the morning. Most people think they need to find their ikigai through some great search or revelation. But ikigai isn't found. It's built through small, consistent actions aligned with what matters to you. I don't know what matters to me, David admitted. I used to have dreams, but they feel so far away now. Then we start with this question: why do you want to change? Not the surface reason. The real reason. David thought about it. I want to feel good about myself again. Why? Because I'm tired of hating myself. Why does it matter? David felt emotion rising. Because Sarah deserves better. Because I want to be someone she's proud of. Someone I'm proud of. There it is, Dr. Tanaka said softly. That's your ikigai. Not running, not losing weight, but becoming someone worthy of the life you have. Someone who honors the people he loves by honoring himself. David felt something break open in his chest. But underneath everything was this simple truth. He wanted to be someone he respected. From now on, Dr. Tanaka continued, when you put on your shoes, I want you to remember that. You're not just exercising. You're practicing becoming that person. Every small action is a vote for the identity you're building. Over the next month, David kept putting on his shoes. He kept stepping outside. But that wasn't the point. The point was that he was proving to himself, over and over, that he could be trusted. He started adding other small practices. 2 minutes of stretching, drinking water first thing in the morning, reading for 10 minutes before bed. Each practice was tiny. Each practice was a vote, and slowly, imperceptibly, like a bonsai tree being shaped over years, David was becoming someone different. Not through willpower or motivation. Through repetition of small truths. Chapter 6. Proof of Change. It was Sarah who noticed first. They were having dinner one evening, 3 months into David's practice, when she looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. What? He asked. You're different, she said. I haven't lost much weight yet, maybe 10 pounds. It's not that. It's something else. You're calmer, more present. You don't have that look anymore. What look? Like you're somewhere else, like you're drowning. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't realize how worried I was until I stopped being worried. David reached across the table and took her hand. He didn't know what to say. He just knew she was right. Something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't fixed. He still had bad days, but he wasn't at war with himself anymore. The numbers started coming too, though they had stopped being the point. He had lost 15 pounds. He was sleeping better. He had started working on a side project again, just 20 minutes a day, and was actually making progress. His boss had commented on his improved focus at work, but the real changes were invisible. He could sit with discomfort now, without immediately reaching for distraction. He could feel the urge to quit something and just observe the urge without acting on it. He had learned to distinguish between useful pain and useless suffering. In one session, Dr. Tanaka asked him a question that stopped him cold. David, when you think about who you were 6 months ago and who you are now, what's the biggest difference? David thought about it carefully. 6 months ago, I was trying to become someone else. Someone better. Someone who had it all together. Now I'm just trying to be 1% more myself. Does that make sense? Dr. Tanaka smiled, and, for the first time, David saw something like pride in his eyes. That's the entire philosophy. That's Kaizen. Chapter 7. The Complete System. Dr. Tanaka pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. Let me show you the full framework, he said. The principles you've been learning aren't separate. They're interconnected. Together, they form a system. He wrote, Kaizen. Continuous improvement through small changes. You don't need to transform overnight. You need to improve by 1%. Then 1 more percent. Then 1 more. The changes are so small, they don't trigger resistance. But they accumulate into transformation. Shoshin, beginner's mind. Every day is day 1. Every moment is a chance to start fresh. You don't carry the weight of past failures. You just do the next right thing. Nana Korobi Yaoki. Fall 7 times, stand 8. Falling isn't failure, it's information. It's part of the path. The only true failure is staying down. Ikigai. Your reason for being. Your why beneath your why. When you connect small actions to deep purpose, they stop feeling like obligations. They become expressions of who you are. Kaizen is not just for habits. It's a way of approaching everything. Relationships, work, health, creativity. Instead of trying to fix everything at once, you identify the smallest possible improvement. You make that change. You let it integrate. Then, you make the next one. David looked at the principles written on the page. Together, they told a story. A story about how human beings actually change. Not through force, through patience, through self-compassion, through small truths repeated until they become you. This is what I needed 6 months ago, David said quietly. Someone to tell me I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to start. You wouldn't have believed it 6 months ago, Doctor. Tanaka replied. You had to experience it. You had to put on those shoes and feel ridiculous and do it anyway. You had to fall and stand back up. You had to discover that change isn't about motivation. It's about identity. David nodded. He understood now. All of it. The system wasn't complicated. It was just patient. It trusted that small actions, repeated consistently, would reshape not just your behavior, but your entire sense of self. Chapter 8. Long-term transformation. 2 years later, David stood at the starting line of a half marathon. He wasn't the fastest runner there. Wasn't the fittest. But he was there. 2 years ago, he couldn't have imagined this moment. Not because he didn't have the physical ability, but because he didn't have the identity. Now he did. The race itself was hard. Around mile 8, his legs started to scream. Around mile 10, his mind started offering him exits. You could walk. No one would blame you. You've already accomplished so much. But David had learned something over the past 2 years. That voice wasn't truth. It was just discomfort asking for relief. And he could sit with discomfort. He kept running. Not fast. Not pretty. But forward. When he crossed the finish line, Sarah was there, screaming and crying and holding up a sign that said, "You did it." He pulled her into a hug and felt tears on both their faces. But this moment, as beautiful as it was, wasn't the transformation. The transformation had happened on all those unremarkable mornings when he put on his shoes and stepped outside. The transformation had happened every time he fell and stood back up. The transformation had been so gradual, he could barely see it happening. Until suddenly, he looked back and realized he had become someone completely different. He had lost 45 pounds. He was running regularly. He had launched that side project, which had turned into a small business. He and Sarah had reconnected, their relationship deeper than it had been in years. He was sleeping well, eating well, creating again. But more than any of that, he had learned to trust himself. That was the real gift. He wasn't at war with himself anymore. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He didn't hate himself for being human. He just showed up, day after day, and did the next small right thing. At work, people had started asking him what changed. He would try to explain Kaizen, but he could see the doubt in their eyes. The same doubt he'd had 2 years ago. They wanted a dramatic story, a moment of revelation, a complete system they could implement on Monday. He couldn't give them that, because the truth was boring. The truth was, he put on running shoes every morning. The truth was, he fell constantly and stood back up. The truth was, he stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be consistent. The truth was simple. The truth was just very, very hard to believe until you lived it. Chapter 9. The Legacy Moment. 5 years after that first session with Dr. Tanaka, David returned to his office. Not as a patient this time, as a visitor. Dr. Tanaka had retired the year before, but they still met for tea every few months. He was 77 now, moving a bit slower, but his eyes still held that same quiet wisdom. They sat in his living room, surrounded by bonsai trees, and talked about life, about David's business, which was thriving, about his relationship with Sarah, which was stronger than ever, about his health, which he had maintained not through perfection, but through consistency. "I want to show you something," Dr. Tanaka said. He stood slowly and gestured for David to follow him to his garden. In the center of the garden was a large bonsai tree, different from the others. This one was massive, clearly ancient, its trunk thick and gnarled. "This tree is 300 years old," Dr. Tanaka said. "It's been in my family for 7 generations. My great-great-great-great-grandfather planted it. Each generation has cared for it. Tiny adjustments, patient cultivation. No single person shaped this tree. 7 generations of small actions created what you see now." He turned to David. "You asked me once if small changes really mattered. If 1% improvement could lead anywhere meaningful. Look at this tree. Each trim was tiny. Each adjustment was almost invisible. But 300 years of tiny adjustments created something extraordinary." David stared at the tree, feeling the weight of the metaphor. "I understand now," he said quietly. "It's not about the destination. It's about becoming the kind of person who tends the garden." "Yes," Dr. Tanaka said. "That's exactly it." They stood in silence for a while. 2 people who understood that transformation wasn't a moment. It was a practice. A way of being. A commitment to small truths repeated so often they became the foundation of your life. Chapter 10. Your turn. So now, I'm talking to you. The person watching this video. The person who started with so much hope and is wondering if this is just another system that won't work. I can't promise you it will work. I can promise you that if you're willing to start small enough, if you're willing to let go of perfection, if you're willing to fall 7 times and stand up 8, you will become someone different. Not tomorrow, not next week, but gradually, imperceptibly, the way a bonsai tree grows, the way an ocean liner changes course, 1 degree at a time. Here's what I want you to do. Not a 30-day challenge, not a complete life overhaul. Just this. Identify the one thing you've been trying to change. The habit you've been trying to build or break. The person you've been trying to become. Now ask yourself, what's the smallest possible version of that action? So small, it feels ridiculous. So small, you can't fail. Want to start exercising? Just put on your shoes for 60 seconds. Want to start writing? Just open the document. Want to start meditating? Just sit down and take 3 breaths. Want to fix your diet? Just drink 1 glass of water. Make it so small you can't say no. Then do it. Not tomorrow. Today, right now, prove to yourself that you can keep one tiny promise. Then come back here and comment below. Tell me what your one small action is. Tell me you did it. Because when you declare it publicly, when you make it real, something shifts. You stop being someone who talks about change. You become someone who practices it. And here's what will happen. That tiny action won't change your life today or tomorrow. But if you keep doing it, if you keep showing up for that smallest version of yourself, something remarkable will occur. You'll discover that you're not broken. You never were. You just needed a system that worked with your human nature instead of against it. The Japanese have been practicing this for thousands of years, not because they're more disciplined, but because they understand something we've forgotten in our culture of hustle and transformation and dramatic change. Real change is quiet. Real change is patient. Real change is the accumulation of tiny truths repeated until they become who you are. So take your first step. Put on the shoes. Open the document. Drink the water. Do the smallest thing. Then do it again tomorrow. And the next day. And the next. You don't need to see the finish line. You don't need to have it all figured out. And one day, maybe years from now, you'll look back and realize you're standing somewhere completely different. Not because of one dramatic moment, but because of thousands of small moments that added up to transformation. That's Kaizen, that's the path, and it's waiting for you to take the first small step. Will you take it?